All right, Corey, good to have you with us. Welcome to the Basu and Godin Notebooks. Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, listen, you are the athletics resident prospect expert, so no better person to discuss the upcoming draft than with you. Let's get as a general first question. There's been it's been suggested for a while that he was not like the greatest draft ever. That it was almost like a slightly below average draft. But as every year, it seems as though as we get closer to the draft and there's more focus on the kids, it seems like just the attention and the focus put on those kids make it so that all of a sudden there seems to be more quality there than originally thought. So what sort of a draft are we going to have this year?
Well, I think if you look through history, you look at what's really a below average draft, what's really an above average draft, you'll find that the distribution is not really like that extreme outside of like the birth years we think of, like 2015, 2003 on the positive end, or 2012 on the negative end. But for the most part, like an average draft gives you 35 NHL players and maybe like 8 to 10 really high impact guys. And if it's below average, that number could be 7 impact guys or 30 NHL players. I mean, there's still going to be, even if the draft is a below average draft, and I would agree it's probably slightly below average this year, I still think there's a ton of good players. Like, I'm going to do an article in a few weeks where I compare this year's draft to last year's draft, which I coined about an average draft at the time. And it's really going to look extremely similar, other than the fact that I'm going to say that the number one guy in last year's draft, Celebrini, was miles better than the next guy, which is not the case with Matthew Schaefer this year compared to the rest of the player pool. But for the most part, I think, I mean, you can draw lines between, like, where does Ivan Demidov compare to Porter Martone, or like where does Beckett Seneke compare to Anton Frondel, or where does Lev Shunov compare to Michael Misa? You can really have real good conversations about those kinds of players, and I think it'd be rather close. I think this year's draft would be the only thing that'd be a little different is last year, like I said, you had that real superstar one in Celebrini. And I think when you got to 10, 11, 12, you were, Sam Dickinson's a really exciting prospect.
Mm-hmm.
Zeev Boyum's a really exciting prospect. I don't think I'm going to be that excited about the players called it a 10, 11, and 12 like I was last year. But overall, I still think, there's going to be a lot of, really good players. There'll be first line forwards coming out of this draft. There'll be top four defensemen coming out of this draft. I think Ravensburgen's got a really good chance to be a starting goalie in the NHL. And where the Habs are picking 16 and 17, I think they're going to get two players who they think have chances to be either a top six forward or a top four defenseman in the NHL.
Yeah, so that's where I wanted to go because I was looking at your latest rankings, which came out right just before the lottery. So a few weeks ago. I don't know how much things have changed since then, but it's just more curious about the way you set up your tiers, right? And so you have tier 4 ending just after 18, right? 18 to 19, which is Ravensburgen to Cameron Reed at 19. So the Canadiens holding 2 picks in that tier. What is, in your mind, if they were to get someone in that tier, which starts with Brady Martin and finishes with Ravensburgen, but it's what caliber of player do you think you find in that tier, outside from bubble top and middle of the lineup player, which is what you label it? It's tier 4 this year, worse, better, average, same as most years?
I would say about the same. I don't think Brady Martin's getting to 16. I think there's a chance he's going closer to 6 than 16 this year, quite frankly, from what I've been hearing after the U18s. But there'll be people like I have Cameron Reed on the periphery of that tier. I think there'll be some people in the league that have him in that group. I have Jackson Smith on the periphery of that group. Some people would have him in there. Same with Sasha Boumediene, Blake Fiddler. Depending on who you talk to, there's not as much consensus once you get outside the top 5 or 10 in any given draft. But I think, you're looking at that group, and 16 or 17, you're hoping to get a guy who's a second line wing. I think Carter Baird, Justin Carbonneau are guys who people think can be a second line wing. I think you look at a guy like Carbonneau, for example, people think, the guy reminds me a lot of Dylan Holloway at the same age. Carter Baird's got a lot of skill, showed a lot of offense in the Western League. Look at a guy like Braden Coots, which I think could get close to where they're picking.
Yeah.
You're looking at a guy maybe a middle six center. Is he dynamic? No. He's 6-0, so maybe he's a third line center on a really good team, second line center on an average team, or a below average team. I think that's what the hope is for a player like that. With Reed Smith, I think you're hoping for, number 4 defenseman, maybe 3s if it goes really, really well, maybe 5s if it doesn't go so well. But I think you're getting real at players, useful players, guys who will have significant careers, you project will have significant careers, and guys where, if it goes well, we've seen high-end players come out of that range, like Jackson Smith. I'm hearing a lot of comparisons to him and Thomas Harley at the same age. Teams beat up Thomas Harley. It's why a 6'3" guy who can move and has offense went closer to 20 is people were worried how that game would translate. And he actually had some struggles initially in his pro career, and now he's a tremendous NHL
the number
player.
one defenseman. Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean that's going to happen, but you can get that kind of player in this range, even if it's not the most likely outcome.
So very often when a team has 2 first-round picks, we say, there are certain prospects that are risky in their own way, and it's the sort of profile that would fit for a team that's got 2 first-round picks. So I hear that argument and that line of thought every year. I don't know if it verifies ultimately, and if those teams that have multiple first-round picks go for their riskier picks, and if those who were perceived as riskier picks back in their draft shown to be riskier than any other. I don't know about that, but do you see along those lines some prospects who could be in the Canadiens range and who would be particularly interesting for a team that says, you know what, we got 2 cracks at that, so let's try something that might be considered a bit more of a gamble?
Yeah, the guys who I think would qualify for that, I don't know if quite fit in their range, unless they decided to take a goalie and take Ravensbergen, which I don't think would be an insane idea, although I think the positive development of Yakovdobi is to go along with Fowler. I don't know if that's the optimal decision for them, but I think he's a better probably prospect than either of them, although I don't think by a substantial margin. The real high risk guy is Roger McQueen. He missed the entire year due to a back injury, but he's really talented. Someone will roll the dice. I don't know when it happens, but him getting to 16 seems highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Then you have a guy like Ivan Ryabkin who came into the year as a potential top 10 pick, and I'm not even sure he goes like top 40 right now, to be perfectly honest, kind of thing. Like he's getting beat up by teams pretty good, but he's really, really talented. Some compete issues, there's some character issues on him that teams have concerns on, but like you look at his draft -1 year, he basically did what Ivan Demidov did in the NHL at the same age. Like he's really talented. I think he's worth a high second in my opinion, but I think that's one that comes to mind. There's another Russian, Daniel Prokhorov, not quite the dynamic offensive type, but he's 6'5". He can skate. He's physical. He's been the captain this year for the Russian under-18 age group when he's played for them. Taking a Russian is always considered a little bit of a gamble, even if it's not always the right one. And a guy who's been, I guess, beat up a little bit in the pre-draft process has been Lyndon Lakovic. He looked really impressive in his draft -1 year with Moose Jaw, 6'4" forward who could skate. He has skill. He has a great shot. His compete looked really concerning this year. A lot of teams have, went to, see him and came away unimpressed, but he's super talented. Like he looked like a potential top 10, top 12 pick coming into the year. He just didn't really have that kind of year, but I think he'd qualify as well for that type of dice roll where I think he has legit top 6 forward tools with size, but I think he's going to go later than that profile will suggest.
But when you say, questions about the compete, does it manifest itself always the same way when it comes to draft eligible players? Like for Lakovic, when you talk about, questionable compete, how did it show?
Yeah, I mean, like for him and Ryabkin, it's 2 different ways. Like Lakovic is more just a lot of perimeter play. He's a shoot first type of guy. So I think it's just more about he's a big guy who didn't really drive the net a ton. He's not very physical. So I think So it's kind of like the Anthony Mantha syndrome a little bit in terms of how he plays. Whereas Ryabkin, it was like the complete opposite. He's physical, but he's like crazy physical, and just like would do. I think when he came over to North America, I think he got like 2 suspensions in his first 5 or 7 games, something like that. You see him like. You've seen him throw tantrums on the ice and like just be really stupid, like in between whistles and stuff like that. So that would be different things along those lines. But exactly, when you see the best games from a guy like Lakovic, and I've seen him quite a few times, you think if this guy showed up consistently, he's a top 6 forward in the NHL.
Right.
Right.